Part 1. Once upon an office party. 1. The party, December 14th. When I was little, my parents nicknamed me Happy-Go-Lucky. They said it was due to my perpetually sunny disposition. I also had a natural inclination to be extra nice to everyone I met. On the surface, that might seem like a good thing, but deep down I knew it was a flaw. I couldn't handle the idea of anyone thinking badly of me. I also tended to be a bit of a pushover. When someone asked me to do something, I usually said yes, even if I didn't particularly want to do it. Hence why I was currently running late for the annual office Christmas party. As I was coming home from work, I witnessed my next-door neighbour, Doreen, trip and fall while carrying in her groceries. I hurried to assist her, and when it became apparent she'd hurt her ankle and needed to ice it, she asked if I'd put her purchases away. Me being me, I said yes. When her ankle continued to swell, she asked if I'd drive her to the hospital so she could have it looked at by a doctor. And again, I nodded my head. So now I was going to be over an hour late for the party. I reminded myself that most people tended to show up late these days, but I promised Nadia, our receptionist, that I'd try to get there early to help set out the finger foods. Oh well. After dropping Doreen home, I dashed inside my cosy two-bedroom house and quickly spruced myself up. I chose a sparkly purple skater dress that I considered delightfully festive and did some quick work with my curling iron. A little touch-up on my makeup, and I was ready to go. I sent my co-worker and office BFF, Lila, a text to let her know I was running late. She didn't reply, so I guessed she was either enjoying herself too much to check her phone, or she was pissed at me. I hoped for the former. Every year I looked forward to this party, mostly because I told myself this would be my year to shine. I'd charm all of my co-workers and suddenly become popular. I'd no longer be Maisie Wilkins, the friendly but generally uninteresting researcher who was always willing to take on extra work. I'd be funny, interesting, popular Maisie, a firm office favourite. Unfortunately, being funny and interesting generally required alcohol, and 2 drinks was my limit. My conservative side feared losing control. What if I said something rude to a co-worker, or decided to jump on the bar and do a Coyote Ugly-style dance? Another part of me yearned to let loose, go with the flow and see where the night took me. Perhaps I should up my limit to 3 drinks. Okay, 4 tops. I was full of nervous energy when I arrived at the party, which was being held at a local bar just down the street from our office. I inhaled a deep breath, plastered on a bright smile, then headed inside. Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree was playing, and I recognized a bunch of my fellow workers by the bar, and another few over on the dance floor. Lila was among them, tall and pretty, with short dark hair, ice blue eyes, and cat-like features. She was also an amazing dancer, which was probably why 1 or 2 of our colleagues were currently eyeing her enviously. Yes, like many other workplaces, James and Peterson Investigations had its fair share of petty jealousies and bickering. We were a medium-sized private investigation firm in the seaside town of Torquay. I was the firm's primary researcher, which meant my work mostly involved a desk, a computer, and a telephone. Sometimes I went to the library to look at microfiche, when I wanted to mix things up a little. I considered joining Lila over on the dance floor, but I wasn't brave enough just yet. Glancing at the bar, I decided a drink might bolster my confidence. I was just about to turn around when she spotted me and called out, "Maisie! There you are!" "Hey, sorry I'm late. I got held up. Did you see my text?" "You what?" Lila shimmied her way over, straining to hear what I said above the music. "Never mind. Go dance. I'm just going to grab a drink." She nodded and smiled. "See you in a bit." On my way to the bar, I spotted Nadia, our office receptionist. She gave me a bit of a frosty look over the fact I hadn't come early to help her with the nibbles. I sent her an apologetic look in return, my stomach twisting that she was annoyed with me. I made a mental note to buy her a coffee on Monday morning to make up for it. I couldn't have a co-worker being annoyed with me. No, that just wouldn't do. The bickering I mentioned? Well, let's just say I avoided it like the plague. I joined Miles and Jenny, two of our investigators, and Kieran, an administrator. They all stood together chatting about a case the firm was currently working on. "Hi, everyone," I greeted, smiling. Miles gave me a brief nod while the others continued their conversation, barely noticing I was there. "His wife is definitely cheating on him," Jenny said. "He thinks his housekeeper stole his credit card, but I'm telling you, it was the wife. She's using it to check into hotels with her fancy man." "Willoughby does strike me as a bit of a cuckold," Kieran agreed. "Actually, his wife isn't having an affair," I interjected. "We've already completed an in-depth background check, and all of her free time is accounted for." When none of them acknowledged what I'd said, I swallowed back a lump in my throat. This sort of thing happened a lot. Maybe I should practice speaking louder, or maybe I just wasn't interesting enough to bother listening to. As I scanned the party, I blinked and did a double take. On the other side of the bar sat Cameron Grant, who was our head investigator and a very intimidating individual. He was looking right at me. Had he witnessed my failed attempt to join the conversation? God, I hoped not. The only thing worse than being ignored was having someone else see it happening. I looked away and tried to get the bartender's attention, but I could still feel Cameron's intent observation. Every office had that one person you didn't mess with, the one who glared at you with the disapproval of 1,000 fiery suns when you so much as made a typo on a research document. At James and Peterson, Cameron was that person. He was grumpy, antisocial, and just slightly terrifying. He was also darkly handsome and, well, quite sexy. It was seriously unfair for someone so cranky to be that gorgeous. Dark brown hair, greenish hazel eyes, a strong jaw, and thick, dark eyebrows. Yes, Cameron Grant was quite the looker. It was a pity his attitude made me break out in hives. I rarely had the courage to broach a conversation with him for fear of his disdain. He didn't do pleasantries, and he certainly wasn't shy in letting you know when you were bothering him. I honestly didn't get how someone could care so little about what others thought. And okay, perhaps a small part of me was impressed because I was the opposite. I cared too much what people thought. The bartender, who was wearing a bright red reindeer jumper, finally gave me his attention, and I asked for a gin and tonic. Glancing at Cameron again, I was relieved to find he wasn't watching me anymore. He was sitting alone, not talking to anyone. That wasn't out of the ordinary. He never really made small talk. What was out of the ordinary was the fact he was here at all. In the 5 years I'd worked at the firm, I'd never seen him attend the Christmas party. He didn't partake in the yearly Secret Santa either, or accept the glass of mulled wine our accountant Terry shared with everyone on Christmas Eve. Basically, when it came to all things festive, Cameron was a Scrooge. Strike that. When it came to most things, festive or not, he was a Scrooge. That hadn't stopped me from having one or two or several sexy dreams about him over the years. I was 30 years old, single, and allergic to the idea of putting myself out there. In other words, I'd much rather stay home with a bottle of wine and a good book than re-enter the murky waters of modern dating. So yes, Cameron Grant was perfect fantasy fodder for the likes of me, even if he did have a difficult personality. I'd witnessed a few women at the office, both clients and co-workers, try to flirt with him and get shot down. Even if he wasn't such a curmudgeon, there was no way in hell I'd ever put myself in the firing line. I was about to go join Lila when the better angel of my nature took over. In that moment, I felt bad for Cameron sitting there all by himself. After all, I knew what it was like to be ignored. Maybe he decided to make an effort and attend the party, but no one was brave enough to talk to him. Squaring my shoulders, I approached and took the stool next to his. "Hello, Mr. Grant. How are you?" Most people at the office addressed one another by their first names, but we all referred to Cameron as Mr. Grant. That was the extent to which people both feared and respected him. He cast me a sideways glance. "I'm fine, thank you, Miss Wilkins. May I ask why you're sitting there?" I swallowed. "Just thought I'd come say hello. Are you waiting for anyone?" He shook his head, eyeing me like a fly that just landed on his whiskey glass. I endeavoured to keep my cool under his stern gaze. "Well then, you won't mind if I sit with you a while?" "What if I do mind?" I rested an elbow on the bar, feeling flustered. "Do you?" He blew out an irritated breath. "Yes." It appeared it was true that no good deed goes unpunished. Here I was trying to be nice, and he was outright rejecting me. What a miserable bastard. I wanted to leave and pretend this awkward interaction had never started, but instead I soldiered on, laughing awkwardly and tucking some hair behind my ear. It was something I did when I felt self-conscious or uncomfortable. Why was I putting myself through this? Oh, right, because kindness was a virtue. "So, you came to a party to sit by yourself and not talk to anyone? That sounds like a hoot," I said with humour. "No," Cameron replied. "I came to a party because my boss said she'd make me take the New Glenn Waters case if I didn't. Blackmail is a favourite of Georgia Peterson." Hearing that, I couldn't help a small grin. Our boss was an awesome lady. She was confident, worldly, and clever. She also had a work wardrobe that the cast of Suits would envy. She was one of the few people at the office who wasn't intimidated by Cameron, which was why I got a chuckle out of her blackmailing him into coming to this party. Glenn Waters was a regular client of ours. The man had an inordinate amount of people in his life he wanted investigated. His paranoia was unmatched, and he was, well, I hated to admit it, but he wasn't a very likable person. I certainly understood why Cameron didn't want to be assigned his case. He noticed my grin. "Find blackmail funny, do you?" I shrugged. "Georgia clearly wants you to get to know your co-workers better. Just putting this out there, but we're not all completely awful." He appeared unconvinced. "Do you honestly believe that?" "I wouldn't have said it if I didn't." "So those imbeciles who just completely ignored you when you tried to enlighten them about their incorrect assumptions, you believe those are good people?" "I speak too quietly sometimes. They didn't hear me," I said. My leg started to bounce restlessly. "I heard you, and I was sitting on the opposite side of the bar." I winced because there was no arguing with that. "Okay, so maybe not everyone at the firm is particularly pleasant, but some of us are worth getting to know." Cameron considered me a moment. "I find the need to develop personal relationships here superfluous. We're all work colleagues, not family or friends." His statement bothered me. Ironically, though, we probably spend more time together than we do with our own friends and family. So why not get to know the humans behind the job titles? "I already know everything I need to," he grumped and took a sip of his whiskey. I turned my body to face him. This might be the most we'd ever spoken outside of work, and he made me feel oddly combative. "Such as?" I prompted. He eyed me for a moment. A little tingle touched the back of my neck when he seemed to take all of me in. "Take you, for example," he said. I tensed. I might have been curious to know what he thought of our co-workers, but I wasn't so keen to hear his opinion on me personally. "Okay," I said, wary. "You want everyone to like you,
sometimes to your detriment. You go out of your way to do favours for people who will probably never return them, people who aren't worth your time. You laugh in between sentences when nothing funny has been said, and you agree with people when you know what they're saying is incorrect. Also, you smile way too much. It's off-putting.
I blinked, my stomach twisting at the sheer onslaught of truth he'd just spilled. He'd hit a nerve. No, a major artery, and I was metaphorically bleeding out. These were things I already knew about myself, but I didn't like thinking Cameron Grant could see those traits so clearly that he'd noticed all of this when I wasn't even aware of being observed. I guess he was our head investigator for a reason. I rubbed at my collarbone, both unnerved and offended. How can a smile be off-putting?
Cameron's look said, "Seriously, that's what you've chosen to focus on. Smiles should be reserved for rare occasions of happiness. They shouldn't be worn constantly. It makes one wonder what you've got to be so happy about. It can also come across a little desperate."
Desperate? Wow. Way to make a girl feel good about herself. I smile all the time because I'm a happy person, I said defensively. You should try it. Maybe it would make people like you more. He levelled me with an amused look.
Oh, so people don't like me.
Do you see our colleagues flocking to sit next to you here at the bar? No, only me. And we've already established that I'm desperate, so that doesn't bode very well. I lifted my glass and took a long sip, feeling uncharacteristically salty. Cameron eyed me like I'd surprised him, or perhaps I wasn't what he expected. He stared for a little too long, and I suppressed the urge to look away.
Do you like me, Miss Wilkins?
Well, that was a difficult question to answer. I mean, I liked how he looked, but his personality? I wasn't so sure. I don't dislike you. He lifted his whiskey again, smirking.
It's a good thing being liked is low on my list of priorities.
I narrowed my gaze, frustrated. It wasn't often that people riled me, but it seemed this man had a knack for it. From his negative attitude to the fact he thought he knew all there was to know about me already. He'd lodged a bundle of irritation in the pit of my stomach. Before I knew it, I'd finished my entire gin and tonic in record time. He'd driven me to drink. The DJ played Bon Jovi's Bed of Roses, and I was about to get up and leave when Cameron commented wryly,
"Now that just sounds painful."
I frowned at him. Then, realizing he was referring to the song lyrics, I laughed. He'd just made a joke. The unexpectedness of it burst the bubble of annoyance that had been growing inside me. Cameron's lips twitched. A moment of silence fell between us as he held my gaze.
"I apologize if I caused offense."
Apology accepted, I said, mostly because I couldn't stand the thought of there being a tension between us at work on Monday. Besides, what he said about me was mostly true. It just wasn't pleasant when people held that particular mirror in my face. I stood from my stool. I'll leave you to your whiskey. Have a good night, Mr. Grant.
Wait,
he said, and I paused to glance at him quizzically. There was a tiny yet startling hint of vulnerability in him now. Startling because I never thought I'd use the term vulnerable to describe Cameron Grant. It knocked me sideways.
I'd actually appreciate it if you kept me company until Mrs. Peterson arrives and notes my attendance.
It looked like it took a lot for him to say that, and I eyed him in amusement, feeling like I had the upper hand all of a sudden. Why would you want me to keep you company? What with my off-putting smiles and all? He glanced around the room, wincing at the antics of some of our co-workers. Miles, Jenny, and company were boisterously doing a round of shots, egging each other on. When his attention returned to me, his expression softened the tiniest bit.
You're the lesser of several evils. If I'm sitting here with you, There's less chance of anyone else trying to talk to me.
Why, Mr. Grant, coming from you, that almost sounds like a compliment. Again, his lips did that twitching thing, and for some reason, it gave me a flutter in my belly.
Like I said, you're the lesser of several evils.
If I'm the lesser evil, then who is the greater one? A sneaky part of me wanted to know who at the office got on Cameron Grant's nerves the most. I mean, we all got on his nerves, obviously, but I wondered if the people who irritated me also irritated him. Sure, I might be happy-go-lucky, but people could still be annoying from time to time, especially when you worked with them day in and day out.
I'm smarter than that, Miss Wilkins. I won't be giving you any fodder for water cooler gossip.
Ha! Like I was included in the water cooler group. I wasn't anywhere near popular enough to be part of that gang. I tried to think of something else to say, but came up short. I'd never been the most proficient conversationalist. I tended to start off fine, then run out of ideas. Like now. I'd always been far better over email than in real life. Oh yes, I could charm the pants-off clients with my trusty Gmail account, but in person, I was a bit more awkward. Cheerful, but awkward. I noticed how his shirt sleeves were rolled up to his elbows, revealing a nice amount of arm hair and an expensive-looking wristwatch. Weird that I found his arm hair attractive. My cheeks heated, and I decided to distract myself by ordering another drink. The bartender set my second gin and tonic of the night down in front of me, and I took a hungry gulp. Cameron lifted an eyebrow.
Thirsty?
I shifted on the stool and rubbed my palms on the skirt of my dress. Unfortunately, the sparkly material wasn't much help. Something like that, I muttered in response. The silence stretched on until Cameron said,
I suppose we should make small talk.
The stiff way he said it made me laugh. I took another large gulp of my drink. Yeah, I suppose we should. He rubbed his jaw.
What are you working on right now?
I chewed my lip, juggling a few upcoming cases. I have 1 or 2 updates to make to the Vince Young file, but I should have those on your desk Monday morning. Cameron frowned, and I thought I'd said something wrong, but then he surprised me by apologizing.
Sorry, you don't want to talk about work. I don't want to either. It's just, I'm not the best at
conversation, I guessed. He frowned harder than nodded.
Yes. My brother Nick says I'm an antisocial workaholic, that I need to try to branch out, meet people, take up a new hobby.
I was surprised at how he offered up the information. As far as I could tell, he was a closed book with everyone at the office. Nobody could break past his hard shell. I didn't know you had a brother, I said.
I have a sister too, but she lives in London,
Cameron said.
My brother Nick works at the Starbucks in town.
The name rang a bell. Wait a second, the guy with the curly hair? That's your brother. Cameron surprised me again when he let out a deep, almost shy chuckle.
Yeah, that's him. We're very, different.
I never would have guessed you were related. You look nothing alike. His brother was also warm and friendly. He was always charming customers whenever I went in for my morning latte. I didn't mention this, though. I was sure Cameron was already aware of their differences.
He looks more like our dad,
Cameron replied. I found it weird to think of him having parents, siblings. I was used to imagining him as some sort of perfect-looking vampire who slept in a coffin and consumed only blood. Then again, it was hard to explain the whole daylight thing. Everyone says I'm the image of my mum, I said. We both have the exact same blonde hair and brown eyes. She also looks really young, so we sometimes get mistaken for sisters. I laughed fondly. Mum loves it when that happens.
No offence to your mother, but that's probably just a ploy men use to chat you up.
I slapped him on the arm and he appeared amused. Had I really just touched him? That second gin and tonic was taking effect. I swallowed thickly. It's not a ploy. My mum is really pretty, and besides, I never get chatted up, so you're definitely wrong. His only response was an arch look which I didn't get.
Do your parents live close by?
He asked after a stretch of silence. They're in Barnstaple, about an hour and a half away. I visit them most weekends. I had a really close relationship with my mum and dad, probably because I was an only child. I was also lucky in that they were amazingly kind and loving people and had always gone out of their way to support me.
Did you move to Torquay for the job, or were you here already?
Cameron questioned further. I moved for the job. I used to work at the library back home, but I found it a little tedious and boring. I wanted to put my skills to use in a more interesting way, which was why the position at James & Peterson intrigued me so much. You have to admit, our work is pretty exciting sometimes.
I disagree. People are obvious. I've yet to work on a case that's actually surprised me.
I raised an eyebrow. Really? Then why do you do it?
Because I'm good at it.
He was a little more than good. Cameron Grant was the best investigator we had. He had a way of predicting people's motivations, their secrets, their desires. I didn't know how he did it, because I was constantly gobsmacked by the results of many of our investigations. I glanced at him. How do you figure people out?
Everything humans do is for one of three things: money, sex, or power. Once you figure out which one a person wants, the rest is easy.
I lifted my glass, thinking about it. I guess you're right. He nudged me with his elbow.
So which of the three is most important to you, Maisie?
When he used my first name, a little trickle of pleasure went through me. It sounded good in his deep, masculine voice. It seemed like he was becoming more comfortable with me, letting his guard down, which felt, well, nice. I considered his question. Which one was most important to me? Finally, I replied, I'm not sure I'm particularly interested in any of them. It's nice to have money, sure, but I don't crave power at all, and sex is pleasant. But it's not like I couldn't live without it. Oh man, had I really just said that? A deep chuckle from him.
Pleasant, huh?
At the very least, it should be pleasant, I said quietly, staring at the glass in front of me.
And you could live without it?
He went on, a curious note to his voice. There are lots of things people can live without, I answered evasively. We might not like it, but we'd survive. I knew this for a fact, since it had been a number of years since my last sexual encounter, and I was still very much alive and kicking. I downed the last of my drink and motioned to the bartender for another. Cameron opened his mouth as if to say something, but he seemed to think better of it and stayed silent. I wondered if he thought I was drinking too much, not that it was any of his business. When I looked over at the dance floor, Lila was still having a roaring good time, dancing with several of our co-workers. Lila looks to be enjoying herself, I said to break the quiet. Cameron nodded but didn't comment, so I continued. She's pretty amazing. I want to be her when I grow up.
A little late for that,
he quipped. I let out a sigh. I know. Maybe in my next life. I'm fairly sure every man at the office is in love with her, even the married ones. Cameron shook his head.
Not every man.
I eyed him a moment, not particularly surprised that he wasn't secretly attracted to Lila. He didn't strike me as someone who had secret longings. I wondered what he did for company. Then again, he did seem to prefer being alone most of the time. Another silence fell, and I noticed our boss arrive at the party. Georgia Peterson was greeted by a few people as she scanned the room. When she saw Cameron sitting with me, she appeared pleased. Her blackmailing had worked. Looks like Georgia just spotted you. You're off the hook, I said, glancing at Cameron. He noted her presence, then drank the last of his whiskey, his dark, sexy eyes trailing over me. Warmth claimed my cheeks.
Maybe I'll stay a little while longer,
he said.
and it sent a rush of pleasure through me. Seriously, when Cameron Grant found your company tolerable, you took it as a compliment. This feeling of flattery was probably the reason why I ordered a 4th drink and a 5th, possibly a 6th. Cameron kept up the pace with me, and I lost count of how many whiskies he'd had. It seemed out of character for him to drink this much, just like it was for me, but our conversation was flowing now, and it felt like he was enjoying himself just as much as I was. As the night progressed, and as the alcohol in our systems took hold, we became less Mr. Grant and Miss Wilkins, and more Cameron and Maisie.
"Are you a natural blonde?"
he asked at one point, reaching out to twist a strand of my hair around his finger. I'd never seen him like this, drunk and flirtatious. I liked it. I liked it a lot. I was drunk too, which was why the look he was giving me didn't have me running away like a scared rabbit. "Yes, I am."
"It's very pretty. Your hair, I mean. I've always thought so."
"You have?" Cameron nodded.
"And your eyes, too. They're so brown."
How did he make a colour sound like a compliment? I flushed, despite the alcohol in my system, or perhaps because of it. I relished the way he was looking at me, talking to me, especially after so many years of admiring him from afar. Perhaps it was a good thing Cameron was grumpy and antisocial on a day-to-day basis, because if he acted like this all the time, every woman in his path would be falling for him head over heels.
"And you've got the best arse in the office,"
he went on, whispering in my ear. A shiver trickled down my spine as I tried my best not to spontaneously combust. Cameron Grant liked my bottom. He thought it was the best bottom out of everyone we worked with. On an ordinary day, this fact would have made me shy, but right now I just felt giddy. My eyes rose to the plant that had been pinned above the bar, conveniently right over our heads. "Is that mistletoe?" I questioned absently.
"Why, yes," Cameron replied. "I do believe it is."
"Huh."
"Does this mean we should kiss?"
I met his gaze. "I don't know. Does it?" That was the last thing I remembered saying before the two of us were drunkenly hailing a cab back to his place. I wondered vaguely if anyone had seen us leave together, but brushed the thought aside. I was too distracted when Cameron placed his hands on my cheeks, eyes wandering back and forth between mine.
"You're very pretty, Maisie,"
he murmured drunkenly before his mouth found mine. Surprisingly, the kiss wasn't sloppy. Well, it was a little sloppy, but in a sexy, needy way. His tongue slid hungrily past my lips, and I wondered if maybe it had been just as long since Cameron last had sex as it had been for me. It was a short ride to his flat. Hastily, he paid the driver, then led me towards the building. By the time we made it to his door, a little voice in my head started to nag. "Is this a wise idea, Maisie? Will you regret this in the morning?" I ignored it, and the moment we stepped inside, I pulled Cameron's jacket off, then made short work of his shirt buttons. I briefly ran my hands over his chest before he was kissing me again. His hand came up to massage my breast, and I wished I wasn't wearing so many clothes.
"You're so soft,"
he said, and I let out a shuddering sigh as he nibbled on my lower lip and reached for my zipper.
"Come here. Let me get this off you."
"Yes," I breathed. "Hurry." He groaned when I palmed his cock through his trousers. It had been way too long since I'd touched anyone like this. In truth, I doubted I had ever touched anyone with such urgency. I was a little eager, but his eagerness matched mine. My dress fell to the floor, and he soaked in the sight of me. He grabbed his belt and started to undo it, at the same time kissing me again and moving us into the bedroom. In my peripheral, I noted how nice and neat his flat was, and then my back met his mattress. He kissed my neck and jaw,
and pleasurable chills skittered down my spine. "Cameron, please," I begged. Saying his name seemed to do something to him. His eyes darkened with a fierce hunger. My chest rose and fell rapidly as he gazed down at me. He knelt between my legs, his pants hanging loose at his hips, his hand wet between my thighs, whispering across the fabric of my underwear before he slid it to the side. I trembled when his fingers brushed my clit. Cameron Grant was my work crush. My attraction to him had always felt harmless, since I never imagined he'd ever be interested in me. Then again, he was currently wearing whiskey goggles. "Don't think about that right now."
"You're so wet,"
he said as he moved 2 fingers inside me. I closed my eyes and bit my lip at the feel of it. "More," I urged, and his movements sped up. He briefly paused to pull a condom from his bedside dresser and tore open the packet. He frowned, having a little trouble with it in his drunken state. Swearing under his breath, he threw it to the floor and pulled out another. He had better luck this time, rolling it down his stiff length. "He has a nice penis," my alcohol-fuzzy brain noted.
"This okay?"
he asked when he pressed himself against me. I nodded, breathless, then moaned as he pushed inside. He thrust into me fast and deep, a sexy, dark, lustful expression on his face. I dug my nails into his shoulders, lost to the pleasure. My eyes were closed, but when I opened them, Cameron was absorbing my every reaction, every sound and gasp of need. He massaged my breast, pinched my nipple, then rolled it between his thumb and forefinger. I said a very unladylike word, and he groaned.
"We should have done this years ago,"
he said, voice raspy. Wait, did he actually mean that? His groans grew louder, punctuated with intermittent swearing as he reached between our bodies and thumbed my clit. Pleasure coiled deep in my belly, an orgasm building. Cameron Grant was the most attentive lover I'd ever had, and he wasn't even sober.
"Are you close?"
he asked, sweat glistening on his forehead. My only response was a choked moan as my orgasm swiftly hit. Cameron must have felt it too because his thrusts sped up. His hand moved over my breast, along my collarbone before resting at my throat. He clasped my neck softly, then pressed his mouth to mine when he came. His masculine sounds of pleasure shattered through me. The last thing I remember was him pulling me into the crook of his body to fall asleep, his sexy, sleepy voice murmuring my name as he cradled me to him. When I woke up, it was morning. Cameron was snoring lightly, his body spooning mine. I momentarily enjoyed his warmth before the full realization of what we'd done dawned on me. I'd gotten drunk at a party and slept with a co-worker, a superior even, one of the most foolish things a person could do. Panic and embarrassment settled in the pit of my stomach, not at the act itself, but at the thought of people at work finding out. I didn't want to be the topic of weeks of gossip. Had anyone seen us leave together? The fact that we'd sat at the bar for an extended period of time alone would be a source of gossip. My job was important to me, and I didn't want to be talked about, or lose the respect of my co-workers if they discovered I'd slept with Cameron. It was the sad truth that the woman in these situations was often shunned, while the man was congratulated. Would Cameron go around telling people of his conquest? No, that didn't seem like him. So why was I worried? Perhaps it was more down to the airy, fluttery feeling in my stomach, the strange new emotions I felt when I thought of how he'd been with me last night, his tender looks and soft, affectionately spoken words. Yes, I liked Cameron, and that was very inconvenient for me. Relationships between co-workers at James & Peterson weren't encouraged, mainly because romantic entanglements might affect our work, but also because there was a risk of a harassment claim if the interest wasn't reciprocated. I had bills and a mortgage to pay. and research jobs weren't exactly plentiful. Therefore, I couldn't afford to jeopardize my employment. Deciding I needed to leave, I was careful not to wake Cameron. I crawled out of bed and gathered my things. I searched around his room and found everything except my bra. Where the hell was it? Cameron shifted and I froze. When his breathing evened out, I exhaled and continued looking. Maybe my bra had gotten discarded somewhere out in the living room. I crept outside, holding my clothes to my chest, and looked around. Cameron's flat was nice, like really nice. It was open plan, stylish yet cozy and spotlessly clean. There was even a vase of fresh flowers on the kitchen table. It wasn't at all what I expected of a man in his 30s living alone. Something glinted in the corner of my eye. On the coffee table sat a small crystal bowl, and inside the bowl was what appeared to be a man's wedding ring. My heart thundered in my ears. I stepped closer and with a shaky hand picked up the ring. Was it Cameron's? The very thought made me recoil, and I dropped the ring back into the bowl like it just burned me. Flustered, I looked around for more evidence and felt ill when I found it. There were a few pictures on his mantel, but one in particular stood out. Cameron was wearing a suit, and he stood next to a pretty woman with long, curly brown hair. They were outside a castle of some sort, and the woman wore a wedding dress. Oh, my goodness. He was married. Suddenly it all made sense. His disinterest in the women at work who flirted with him, the fact that his flat seemed to have that feminine touch. And the picture! The woman in the photograph was his wife. Oh God, I'd slept with a married man. Sick to my stomach, I rapidly dressed myself and fled the apartment. Out on the street, I used my phone to order a taxi, panicked thoughts rushing through my head. If Cameron was married, then where was his wife? Was she away for the weekend? And why didn't he ever wear his wedding ring at the office? I knew it was common for some people not to wear their rings because they found them uncomfortable, but I'd never heard anyone mention his wife. Did he think I knew? I couldn't stomach the idea of being the other woman. When my cab arrived, I climbed into the back seat, my mind in panic mode. I wished I could forget last night ever happened, erase it from my memory entirely. But I couldn't. There was no changing what I'd done, and I was filled with dread at the idea of seeing Cameron at work on Monday. Should I confront him? Pretend it never happened? Demand he tell his wife he cheated? I closed my eyes, no answers forthcoming. At least I had the weekend to think things through. Always a silver lining.